If not now, when? Stopping the San Onofre nuclear storage disaster.
A nuclear disaster at the San Onofre nuclear waste dump is unavoidable. That's according to an Orange County geologist and San Juan Capistrano mayor.
They want to stop San Onofre's radioactive spent fuel rods from being moved in giant canisters to be buried in concrete bunkers right next to the beach, 60 miles north of downtown San Diego.
At the San Onofre nuclear generating station, the threat of nuclear meltdown is shifting to concerns now over nuclear leftovers.
Shut down in 2012, 3.6 million pounds of radioactive waste now sit in storage at the facility.
We're talking 3.6 million pounds of high-level nuclear waste only 100 feet from the ocean and only inches above the high water mark, and putting it in thin stainless steel canisters only 5/8 of an inch thick.
The San Onofre plant sits within a couple hundred yards of one of the busiest freeways in the United States.
So you're a nuclear waste expert who's lectured at the White House on this topic. You obviously think this is a bad idea. Why?
So for several reasons. One is they basically are going to put the stuff into a thin storage container, which probably will have some problems with corrosion given this ocean environment here. The second idea is they're going to store it such that it'll be about 100 feet from the water and a few inches above the groundwater table, which is totally ridiculous. As the sea level rises, what will happen is the bottom of the containers will corrode.
I have documentation from Holtec and from the NRC that if we have a through-wall crack and water gets in that crack, not the pool water, other water gets in the crack, it will go critical. Not may go critical, it will go critical.
How far out could the reach possibly happen if there were a disaster at San Onofre?
Well, in a worst-case scenario, it could have the equivalent of 75 hydrogen bombs going off. This is remember, nuclear power plants were essentially made to create the material necessary for making nuclear warheads. So it's a potential for an incredible dirty bomb, which is why we want to get this stuff away from the beach and away from the ocean as quickly as possible. 8.5 million people live within the 50-mile plume zone identified by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
50 canisters of radioactive leftovers from fuel burned before the plant was closed are already in storage, placed in steel canisters near San Onofre State Beach.
It's the cheapest alternative. It's what's best for the stockholders. It's not what's best for the people of San Diego and Orange County.
The former head of the Navy in San Diego, retired Admiral Len Herring, is one of the voices sounding the alarm about the way Southern California Edison is going about storing spent nuclear fuel at San Onofre.
I'm an advocate for nuclear energy. I'm not a believer that it needs to disappear. But the proper handling of the material is what we are talking about here.
Prospect of earthquakes, tsunamis, and rising ocean levels may evoke nightmare scenarios. The Fukushima nuclear disaster isn't too far from memory.
Nearly 16,000 people lost their lives and more than 2,000 remain missing from a historic earthquake and tsunami that triggered a meltdown at Japan's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in 2011. As the 9-point magnitude quake sparked a massive tsunami, leading to the world's worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl.
Desolate and blighted, this is Fukushima's exclusion zone.
My wife and I hosted the former Prime Minister of Japan. We organized a conference and it was called Fukushima, Lessons for Southern California. He said in this very room, I almost lost Japan. We have several Fukushima's worth of fuel stored in a deficient system 100 feet from a public recreational beach. When he saw that facility, he was horrified. He was horrified that we've been so misinformed about the nature of this facility and the fuel, that we have children playing in front of the facility. And on top of that, there's no public process, there's no public venue that allows the public to voice its concerns, to defend its public interest in this. Every agency is preempted by federal preemption to not talk about safety. And the very agency, the NRC, that's supposed to defend public safety is a completely captured regulatory agency.
I mean, it's a terrible location for a nuclear power plant, right? It's the mecca for surfing. It's got some of the most popular and best surf spots in the state of California, if not the world, right there between Sano and Trestles. It's incredibly heavily used. It's the 5th most visited state park in California. It's in the middle of this densely populated metropolitan area. It's on the coast. It's seismically active. I mean, the list goes on as to reasons why this is a bad place to have this thing.
Our biggest concern is that nobody really understands how deadly this nuclear waste is, and they're not aware that it's being stored in unsafe containers just a few feet from the beach.
He says the decision by Southern California Edison to put the radioactive waste into steel canisters and place them 108 to 120 feet from the water is a catastrophe waiting to happen.
We are in the 21st century, and the technique they are using, when the Egyptian 3,000 years ago, they used the same technique.
English and Chakraborty say scratches on the canisters open up new surfaces that are vulnerable to chemical reactions, and that could result in corrosion cracking over the long term.
It would lead to crack and cracking of the cylinder, because these cylinders are not that thick. This is only 5/8 inch thick.
And they have installed them in half-inch thin containers that have no radiation detectors on them, where most of the plants in the world use 10 to 20 inch thick storage containers with radiation detectors and other safety devices.
If I were to want to bury a 55-gallon drum of gasoline in my backyard, I would go through a completely different and more regulated process than these people have gone through to bury 3 million pounds of nuclear waste.
If Edison really means what they say, that they want to provide a solution that we, the public, are happy with, well, I'm letting you know right now, we are not happy with this. This is not okay, and most people do not know about this. I live in San Clemente, and I have canvassed almost every business in that town, and most people don't even have a clue this is happening, nor do they want this to happen.
Chakraborty says Holtec International, the company that designed the storage system, has included no sensors to detect potential damage. Edison has resisted suggestions to pull the canisters out to check them, though NRC regulations require the canisters be retrievable.
As highly regulated as California is when it comes to environmental laws, how in the world did something like this come to happen? The possibility of burying nuclear waste on a pristine beach.
If this goes in the ground here, it probably never will get back out.
Scientific American said the steady accumulation of radioactive waste is more of a threat than a meltdown.
We have 51 canisters already there. The oldest is going to be 15 years old. The NRC says once a crack starts in these canisters, it can grow through the wall in 16 years. Edison has no plan for that, no approved plan for that, what they're going to do.
Donna Gilmore, who runs a website called Onofre says leaving nuclear waste stored on site is a recipe for disaster.
San Onofre is only 5 miles as the crow flies from my house. And one of those Chernobyl cans exploding, which I know it's not if, but when, which could be not too far off. We'll be looking at permanent evacuation for probably 100 miles in every direction, depending on which way the wind's blowing. They know these canisters can leak, and what do? They buy more of them. These were not designed to last. Forget talking about transport. I want to know what you're going to do when those canisters start leaking, and we have no answers.
I remember asking somebody from San Onofre at a city event, do you guys have some kind of a disaster recovery plan for people if something happens to this nuclear thing? And the response was, well, we have our own internal plan. It's all good. I go, well, what happens if it gets out for others? No, we really don't have anything.
The real plan is to hide the leaks.
David Fritsch, the floor is yours.
I do industrial safety, so OSHA stuff, not nuclear stuff, but I'm out there. And I may not have a job tomorrow after what I'm about to say, but that's fine. Because I made a promise to my daughter that if no one else talked about what happened on Friday, that I would. About 12:30 on August 3rd, we were downloading, and the canister didn't download, but the rigging came all the way down.
In August 2018, when a second thin-walled canister filled with spent nuclear fuel got wedged into a storage cavity about 18 feet from the floor,
what happened is the thing was in here like this, but it got stuck like this.
The loaded canister nearly fell 18 feet into the bottom of the hole.
There were gross errors on the part of two individuals, the operator and the rigger, that are inexplicable. So what we have is a canister that could have fallen 18 feet. That's a bad day. That happened. And you haven't heard about it. That's not right.
The clearance between this canister and this hole is like a quarter of an inch.
And what happened is inside of that cask, there is a guide ring at 4 feet down, and it's to guide that canister down correctly to be centered in this system. Well, it actually caught that. And from what I understand, it was hanging by about a quarter inch.
The loaded canister nearly fell 18 feet into the bottom of the hole. This crisis was narrowly averted, but English and Chakraborty point out that a Nuclear Regulatory Commission report on the near-miss accident says virtually all of the 29 canisters already loaded likely got scratched repeatedly on the way down.
Well, let's suppose they get it past the ring a little bit. Okay, then they're going to continue the process of move it down a little bit, move it a few inches here, move it there. And what's going to happen is every time you move it, this giant weight of 54 tons bangs into the ring. When it bangs in, it makes a gouge.
The people who were overseeing the operation were actually not particularly trained in Holtec, that's the designer of the system. They weren't trained in the high storm UNAC system. So Edison is making a big effort to show that it will do better next time. And I think the public has really got to really start to hold their feet to the fire because they've lost a lot of trust.
Operational experience is not shared. That problem had occurred before, but it wasn't shared with the crew that was working.
Well, it's actually a probable risk to our entire transportation corridor in Southern California.
Nina Babiar is a transportation expert, says she believes they will be witnessing a massive gridlock if there is an incident at San Onofre.
You have to keep in mind, it's not like our fires. You can't see this, you can't smell it.
With winds in the region moving west to east, inland from the plant, another major transportation corridor, Interstate 15, could also be exposed. Something that would only make the situation worse, Babiar says, possibly forcing officials to isolate San Diego from the rest of the state and Mexico as well. It's not just cars that travel through this corridor, though. The region's primary north-south freight and passenger line runs along the coast near San Onofre. Having to evacuate the millions of people who call the area home would be a nightmare scenario, says Charles Langley, a critic of the nuclear waste storage plans.
It would be absolutely paralyzing. These are jugular veins for our entire Southern California economy.
First of all, the power plant was closed due to mismanagement, and it is an ultra-hazardous condition. We have 50 times the radiation of Chernobyl stored there, and it's improperly stored. The casks that they are presently stored in are susceptible to cracking, which allows radiation to escape, and based on the age that they are now, they're moving into that area where the cracking will occur.
I've spoken to 3 NRC commissioners, 2 former chairmen. They did not know about this cracking issue. That information was kept from them. There's a lot of information with good intended experts on this issue.
What needs to be done now to undo and stop further damage? 1. Edison needs to stop moving additional nuclear waste into these thin storage canisters that are inevitable disasters waiting to happen. 2. Edison needs to repackage nuclear materials currently stored in thin-walled canisters into thick-walled canisters that are safer and can be inspected and therefore transported. 3. Instead of rushing to transfer the nuclear waste currently in the holding pool into even more dangerous thin-wall canisters, Edison needs to keep that material in the pool where it can be monitored until it can be transferred into thick-wall canisters. 4. Once the nuclear waste is contained in the thick wall canisters, they should be moved to a location away from the perilous coast, where they can be kept long-term in reinforced structures underground that would be more likely to remain stable even during an earthquake, unlike their current extremely vulnerable oceanside concrete holders.
We need to make sure that while the waste is here, while the waste is on our coastline, whether it's on the Mesa site or it's 108 feet away from our coastline, that it is safe. And this means ensuring that we have thick-walled canisters. We need to make sure that we have real-time independent monitoring. This means like something you could go on your phone and actually look at an app that shows you that radiation is not leaking today, and you can go down to San Onofre and enjoy your beach day with your family.
The only plan that I know you're actually doing is you've asked Areva, your vendor, to no longer have to report the radiation levels coming out of the outlet air vents. The only possible reason to not share those levels is to hide them.
It is the most dangerous stuff on Earth. It is a witch's brew of radioactive material.
Daniel Hirsch with the University of California, Santa Cruz, is talking about fuel rods, long metal tubes containing radioactive pellets that at one time provided fuel for nuclear reactors. They make up the nuclear waste from San Onofre. Hirsch, a longtime critic of the industry, says the clock is ticking and it's imperative the fuel rods be moved as soon as possible.
What does the NRC say? Oh, well, we don't think you'll have a crack because you don't have enough humidity in your air at San Onofre. Did you hear what I just said? The Nuclear Regulatory Commission says that we don't have enough humidity in our air by San Onofre for moisture to dissolve salts on the canister. We cannot trust the NRC. We cannot trust Edison. We don't have a lot of time left.
The most important thing we can do is prevent the internment of this waste.
At a community engagement panel meeting in November, Tom Palmisano of Southern California Edison responded to a question about the problem of leaving scratched canisters in storage.
According to per the NRC, the damage to all the canisters. Why are you still wanting to load if the canisters are damaged already? When and how will you fix damaged canisters?
Again, I think if the damage is referring to the incidental contact that causes shallow scratching, we don't see that as an immediate issue. The scratches are shallow, well below an acceptance criteria for an acceptable scratch. The oxide layer reforms in these storage vaults. So, quite frankly, we don't have a short-term concern with that. It becomes a long-term aging management concern. We're in compliance today. What Areva is doing on one of the older licenses for our older system is cleaning up some of these requirements that the NRC no longer insists upon. I think that's where the comment came from.
That is a lie, Tom.
So, excuse me.
Stop lying, please. Stop lying.
Please.
Canister. Your license, item 8 on your certificate of approval requires the ability to unload back in the pool. That license is active now. That is not the truth.
I agree with that, and that's what Areva
You're going to go and get an exemption after you get the fuel out of the pool. That's your plan.
Let me suggest that there's a constructive way.
Well, when we have no opportunity.
Let me suggest that there's a constructive way to handle this, which is, why don't you send me a letter with your
because
concerns
then the
about
people here are not going to know the truth.
We were working on a series of stories that were critical of San Onofre and its management. We were getting shots of the facility from a public state beach when police and San Onofre staff demanded that we delete our video and leave. They uncovered this picture showing plastic bags, duct tape, and broomsticks used to seal a leaky industrial pipe inside the plant. We also reported on a Star Trek spoof shot in the plant's training simulator featuring senior plant managers.
I wouldn't mind living right next to the plant. No, I don't see a safety concern. I feel just as comfortable there as I would here.
Retired nuclear engineer Ted Quinn says what Edison is doing now is safe as the utility company transfers the spent fuel rods to steel canisters, which are then placed inside protective concrete blocks.
I live in this community for 38 years, so I feel comfortable that the near term is addressed within the regulatory boundaries that we have.
Seriously, would you trust this guy with the future of humanity?
Okay, but we have safety margins built into everything, and nuclear has more safety margins than almost anything I know.
He actually reminds me of another nuclear worker.
5 more minutes.
On January 9th, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission...
It's pronounced nuclear.
Nuclear Regulatory Commission made a statement that there are no credible mechanisms for the radioactive material from San Onofre to have any impact on the local communities around here or out as far as 10 to 50 miles.
In the early 70s and 80s, I was a nuclear weapons security officer, a nuclear weapons handling officer, a nuclear weapons safety officer, and I understood what it took to safely maneuver and move nuclear material of a much smaller quantity than we're dealing at San Onofre properly, with the safeguards, conditions, and procedures. And the more I learned about what was going on at San Onofre, the more I became scared. I started to question whether or not they knew what they were doing, and more importantly, whether or not there were procedures and certifications were in place. And the individuals who actually responsible for moving 2.6 million pounds of material were the right people to do what they're doing.
Ooh, what's this? No! Who'd have thought a nuclear reactor would be so complicated?
We're undermanned. We don't have the proper personnel to get things done safely, and certainly undertrained. Many of the experienced supervisors, what we call CLSs, cast load supervisors, once they understand the project and how everything works, are often sent away, and we get new ones. They don't understand as well as even the craft, basic construction craft. A lot of them that haven't been around nuclear before are performing these tasks.
Tom Palmisano, Edison's vice president for decommissioning, is confident in the company's plan to add 75 more canisters to the 50 that are already there.
You're looking at the existing dry fuel storage installation, which is a stainless steel canister stored horizontally in an above-ground steel module, or concrete module. That's where the new partially below-grade system will be installed. It will be set back approximately 100 foot from the ocean behind the seawall. This seawall, I believe, is 27 foot. That is designed and sized for the maximum expected tsunami that would occur.
Now make sure this barrier is completely idiot-proof. Cletus.
Yes,
Try to dump something in the lake.
Okay. I can't. I simply can't.
What both the Watchdog Group and Southern California Edison do agree on is the need to find a long-term solution to get the waste out of San Diego County. That won't be easy. A nuclear waste site that was to open at Yucca Mountain in Nevada never opened because of political decisions made during the Obama administration. Right now, there is no place to move the millions of pounds of waste to a safer, more permanent resting ground.
We'd like to see safer containers, safer location on the facility, because what we have is completely unacceptable.
It is a seismic area. It has a ocean level that changes. We all feel that the fuel should move to sooner than currently scheduled.
At a community engagement meeting arranged by Edison, Chief Nuclear Officer Tom Palmisano says the plan is to move the nuclear waste elsewhere once it has cooled to safe interim storage, possibly in Texas or New Mexico.
Our commitment is to support any reasonable and safe way to move fuel out of San Onofre, whether it's a permanent repository, one of these two projects, or something not yet on the horizon.
But Greg Yasko, who headed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 2012 when San Onofre shut down because of a radioactive leak, says don't count on it.
Because quite frankly, once they get loaded, I don't see them ever taking those canisters out of there. Realistically, they're not going to move them out. So those permits will be extended, the operational period will be extended repeatedly, and you will have a de facto kind of burial site there.
Yasko says the problem of what to do with nuclear waste is a national one.
Very quickly people came to this conclusion that the way you solve this problem is you find a place where you can bury it. It's literally called bury and forget, right? You bury the waste, you forget about it.
Tom English is a retired electrical engineer who's worked with government and industry on nuclear waste disposal. He says moving spent fuel rods out of cooling ponds and into dry cask storage is a good idea, but not if the bottom of those casks are just feet above mean high tide levels.
If you're involved with high-level nuclear waste disposal, the first thing that you think of is keep it away from water. because the water allows the radionuclides to spread through the environment and causing all sorts of havoc, wrecking ecosystems, cancer, etc.
This is not a game that we're talking about with San Clemente and the future generations and children and food and water and evacuation and how many tons of that crap is there. Every time you ask the NRC, who are supposed to be the watchdogs, the government watchdog, they'll say, well, I really don't know. I'll get back to you. But they never do.
It either has been done or it has not been done. And if it has not been done, then it needs to be engineered to a point in which we are absolutely assured 100% that the safety of that material will not jeopardize or potentially destroy Southern California or any place else it may be buried. We are supposed to be the most technologically advanced, nuclear-capable country in the world that not only regulates, but understands the consequences of the risks. And we are today allowing the burial on a beach of 3 million pounds.
The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has let us all down. They're not doing their job. They're letting an industry do something that's so obviously wrong that you can see it from space in a Google image when you look at that nuclear waste right on the beach.
We cannot allow this to happen without assurances that what they are doing is safe. And not safe in a questionable fashion, because every time you ask them, they say, well, theoretically, it could be done. You don't screw with theoretical nuclear catastrophes.
What's it going to take to stop the burial at the San Onofre site, put it on hold until we can see if the Yucca Flats is a possibility or some other area that is far away from the population?
Yeah, I think what it's going to take is people getting up in arms about it and going and talking to their representatives and saying, we don't want this threat in our backyard. I believe that transportation of these materials to an interim storage facility that doesn't have the earthquake risk that we have at San Onofre and is farther away from sensitive receptors like the beach, like the major railroad, like Interstate 5, which are all within a couple hundred yards of the burial site, that would be a proper interim solution until we get a permanent solution.
What can you do? Contact Governor Newsom to demand that he use some of the billions of dollars in funding from utility rates to stop this disaster in progress before we are pushed into a gamble we are guaranteed to lose.
Call your local elected officials, call your state representatives, call those individuals who are in the federal system who can take the NRC to task, and tell them this is not a regulatory issue, this is a safety issue. And the Constitution of the United States directs that this government provide for our safety, and they are not. Thank you.
We'll keep our fingers crossed that the new administration will help California move some of this waste to a safe place.
Find more information at publicwatchdogs.org. Thank you.